I have a lot of mixed feelings about Fallout 3. It feels like I can't stop mentioning it actually, and I could make a whole big video about it, but I agree with most of what H-Bomber Guy and Mr. Caption had to say about it in their videos. So if you want my opinion, most of what I think is present there. In summary, I think it was disappointing compared to the first two games, and it reused a lot of story beats and concepts from the originals while not adding enough good original material that fit with the things they reused. It kind of felt like they were trying to make two games at once. They were trying to make their take on an apocalypse setting while also trying to make a third Fallout game, and the problem is those two visions don't mesh super well. There's some cool stuff here and there in Fallout 3, but a lot of it is poorly implemented and generally poorly thought out. Still pretty fun in its own weird way, but not really up to my standards. New Vegas did a lot to improve on Fallout 3's foundation, which all of you already know. What I'm going to mention here specifically is its improvements to the game engine. Fallout 3 is notoriously unstable, and so is New Vegas, but New Vegas is slightly more stable and has some improvements here and there to the way that the back end of the engine works. New Vegas proved to be much more alluring to the modding community because of this. At the time of writing, on the Mod Nexus website, New Vegas has almost twice the mod files that Fallout 3 does. The community even went so far as to mod the entirety of Fallout 3 into the New Vegas engine purely for the improvements that it made. This is a series about the major mod projects for the Fallout games, but mods for Fallout 3 are largely absent because of the reasons that I just mentioned. It's just easier to work with New Vegas. It's kind of like how there are very few total conversion mods for Fallout 1 because the Fallout 2 engine is identical, it just works better. All this being said, there is one exception that I could find. A total conversion or DLC sized, whatever you want to call it, mod for Fallout 3 does exist. And it was actually made before New Vegas was released. This is immensely fascinating to me, as there isn't really much contemporary Fallout content that hasn't in some way been touched or influenced by New Vegas. Practically all Fallout content made after Fallout 3 was also made after New Vegas and took inspiration or ideas from New Vegas. Fallout 4, for example, took a lot from New Vegas's faction design and companion system. This mod is going to be really interesting as an almost anthropological artifact, being such a rare thing. The mod I'm talking about is Alton, Illinois. It's one of very few major world space mods for Fallout 3 and one of even fewer that's finished. It was started in 2009 and was released shortly after New Vegas's launch. Its last update was in 2013, and there's been very, very little coverage of it online despite its size and uniqueness as a Fallout 3 project rather than as a New Vegas one. The only other review I could find was a Tumblr post, and there's gameplay out there, but really not that much content, surprisingly. So, because this series is all about shining a light on smaller fan projects, let's take a look at Alton, Illinois, a mod for Fallout 3. Right out the gate, I'll tell you this. Alton, Illinois is not good. At least, it's not good in the way you'd expect a Fallout game, or any game, to be good. From what I could find out in my research, the mod was developed by a high schooler who lived in Alton, Illinois and wanted to make their own Fallout thing set in their hometown. And that's cool, and big props to them for making their own Fallout thing set in their hometown, and especially for finishing it and putting it out there, even if my opinions on it aren't very flattering for the most part. Whenever I review stuff, I kind of feel like the critic from Ratatouille, you know, and he's like,
"In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment."
So I kind of try to come at projects in good faith, even if I don't really like them. A lot of the problems that I have with Alton, Illinois can be summarized by what I said before. The mod was developed by a high schooler with no modding experience. Unfortunately, you can kind of tell. Let's start off with the presentation. Immediately of note to anyone who tries the mod out is its voice acting. The voice acting for Alton, Illinois is recorded on what sounds to me like a laptop's built-in mic, and it's recorded by a non-professional high schooler, so it sounds probably exactly how you'd expect it to.
So you're the new recruit. Aren't you a bit scrawny for this job?
It's charming at times in a sort of, aw, look at this cute kid try to sound intimidating kind of way, but its charm wears off really fast and it can kind of ruin interactions you have with the mod's characters. But there is a mod for this mod that was made to rework and revoice a few of its major characters. Any change would be better than what this mod has to offer. The revoicing project was done hastily by someone on a blue snowball microphone, which is the mic I used in my Pathologic and Fallout 1 videos. It's still not very good quality-wise, but it's better than what the original product had, so for the rest of the video, when I play dialogue, it'll be from the revoicing project. Link for that will also be in the description, along with the regular mod. Apart from the voice acting, the presentation is still a mixed bag. There are a few new guns and outfits, including this sick Plague Doctor outfit. Side note, okay, this Plague Doctor outfit is worn by the group in the mod known as the Plague. Why is the Plague wearing Plague Doctor outfits when Plague Doctors were historically trying to stop the plague? Your guess is as good as mine. It's not very important. I still thought I'd mention it. The mod features its own radio station with a whole bunch of new Fallout 3-esque songs. The DJ for this radio station is just Three Dog, but he's cut so that he isn't saying anything about the Capital Wasteland.
Fight the good fight, sister.
Well, they let old Pete out of jail.
Which is really weird, but honestly, I'm glad they did this instead of voicing it themselves. The poor voice acting is rough enough when you're talking to characters. Having to hear it every 2 or 3 minutes and hear the same lines over and over again, as Fallout radios inevitably have, would probably drive me insane. So, creative workaround, I guess I'll take it. As far as the world space itself, it's pretty good. There are a wealth of locations to explore and travel to throughout the small town of Alton, Illinois. The size of this mod, its story, its world space, its additions to weapons and armor, is comparable to that of Point Lookout, my favorite DLC from the base game of Fallout 3. The world space feels familiar in that it's designed similarly to the world space of the original game, but it has a few standout design changes and a whole bunch of new things to look at and go, oh my god, look at this towards when you see them. There is something a little off about it though, and I'll explain what I mean. The world space of Alton, Illinois feels constructed. That's kind of a poor word to use to describe it because of course it's constructed, all world spaces are, but it feels like it was made by a person designing a world space for their video game rather than like it was made as a world for its characters. World design is something that I'll be talking about a lot more in this series now that we're looking at mods for the 3D Fallout games, because the space in between towns is something you physically traverse in 3 dimensions rather than, as it was in Fallout 1 and 2, a flat mass that you travel across like in Indiana Jones' scene transition. When it comes to open world design, there's a lot of comparisons to theme parks. Fallout 76, for example, feels like Disney World. Each zone has its own color palette and style, and the entire thing feels like it was made specifically for the player to walk through and experience zone by zone by zone, similarly to how you would experience a theme park. You go to one zone, you do all of its big rides, and then you move on to the next zone. Alton, Illinois isn't like this. It's one zone, there are cool things to look at, but doesn't really feel like you're being railroaded from Thunder Mountain to Space Mountain to Mickey's Magic Teacups. There is something that Alton, Illinois shares with the theme parks though. Both are essentially simulacrum of real spaces. Alton, Illinois doesn't feel like a real place in the Fallout universe. It feels like an uncanny imagining of what an existing place in our world would look like if it was dropped into the Fallout universe a few days before the bombs hit. The developer lived in the real-life Alton, Illinois, so it makes sense that the world space of the mod is a recreation of the town as they saw it. The problem with that is that everyone sees a town differently, and one person's memory of what a town was to them doesn't necessarily translate super well into a realistic, explorable world space that your player will see and connect with. Alton, Illinois doesn't feel like a world. It feels like a memory that the mod author slapped some post-apocalyptic paint onto. Now, this is charming in its own right, just like the voice acting is, but it definitely takes you out of the Fallout experience, just like the voice acting does. Overall, the presentation is unique, for better or for worse. This is why I wanted to play this mod in the first place, because of how unique it seemed at a first glance, and in its presentation, it lives up to that. Unfortunately, I can't really say the same about its story. The premise of the mod is as follows. The The Brotherhood outcasts in DC receive a long-distance distress signal from the West Coast Brotherhood, so they enlist your help to get on a plane to the West Coast to help them out. If you're paying attention, you're already noticing some weird stuff. Why do the outcasts need a Wastelander's help? Their whole deal as remnants of the old Brotherhood is elitism. Not trusting Wastelanders is part of that. Why are the outcasts in DC the only people in the US capable of going to help? Wouldn't it make more sense to call over, say, chapters of the Brotherhood not literally on the other end of the country? Why do you get the message when you leave Vault 101? How do the Brotherhood know you, and why do they want you? The mod has no answers for this. There's a big issue in a lot of fan projects where the NPCs act like they're aware that you're the main character and overstate your importance when they really have no reason to. This is super evident in the Frontier, which I'll get back to. But for now, this is a good example. The outcasts are breaking their own code. And for who? A random vault dweller? A teenager? On top of this, everyone in the mod won't stop calling the main character the newcomer. It'd be fine if like one character said that because, yeah, you are new to Alton, but it seems as though every character in the entire town all simultaneously agreed that your name was the newcomer without you ever introducing yourself as such. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. You get on the plane with the outcasts to go help the West Coast Brotherhood, but the plane crashes on the way over, landing in the town of Alton, Illinois, with you as the only survivor. You have to find a way home, which involves interacting with the factions in the region and helping out where you can. There are two major factions in Alton, the Underground Railroad and the Plague. The Underground Railroad have no relation to the Railroad of Fallout 4 or the Underground Railroad of American history, even in goal. They don't help free anyone, they just live in a system of train tunnels, thus the Underground Railroad. This makes the name choice absolutely bewildering to me. If you're going to reference the historical Underground Railroad and use their name, you ought to at least justify your usage by having it in some way relate to the historical Underground Railroad. In Fallout 4, the Railroad aren't called the Railroad because they have railway rifles. They're called the Railroad because they free an enslaved underclass just like the historical Underground Railroad did. Alton's usage of the name is unwarranted and frankly bizarre. Their leader is extremely generic and gives you almost no exposition regarding his goals, motivation, or backstory, aside from his general opposition to the Plague, who are the other faction in Alton. The Plague are a much more interesting group, but not necessarily too great either. The Plague are the remnants of a vault in the region that was set to malfunction in a typical vault techie way. No water chip, very little food. The inhabitants of Vault 59 had distress signals running for years, hoping someone on the outside would come open the vault up so that the people could leave and hopefully live better lives. Nobody did, until a trading caravan went through the area and eventually opened it up and told them that they heard the signal loud and clear. Everyone else was just ignoring them. So, as an act of revenge, the Plague now dressed like edgelords and burn shit. I mean, fair enough. The problem with these factions is a problem of exposition. The Underground Railroad give you practically no exposition when you meet them. They're sort of just there, and you have to trust by their generally clean town and their posturing as the good guys that that's what they are. The Plague, on the other hand, overloads you with exposition. The second time you ever talk to anyone involved with the Plague, they just tell you their entire life story, whining on and on for a sequence spanning several minutes of the leader just talking about why he's dedicated to being so dastardly and evil. Neither the Underground Railroad nor the Plague sell themselves as realistic or worth siding with in any way, especially since, to accomplish the goal of the mod, returning to DC, neither faction is actually logistically required. The Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave are also kinda here, but they don't really do much. It's not offensive that they're here because Illinois is where Chicago is and the Enclave have a big old base in Chicago, but it really just feels like the Enclave and the Brotherhood are put around to make it feel like Fallout, in the same way that Fallout 3 reused them without any really good reason to make Fallout 3 feel like the original games. Okay, now I'm gonna elaborate on the story of the mod and explain specifically what happens and why it fails. Basically, the main crux of the struggle is, do you forgive the Railroad for not letting the Vault Dwellers out sooner or not? If you do, you side with the Underground Railroad, kill everyone in the Plague Vault, and you get to leave. If you don't, you side with the Plague, kill everyone in the Underground Railroad, and you get to leave. Both paths line up similarly in quests and really only differ in aesthetic. But here's the kicker. When you start in Alton, the leader of the Underground Railroad tells you to go to a nearby settlement whose leader has a means of transport for you to get back to DC. He gives this information away freely without you needing to do any of his quests for it. You get there and the leader tells you to clear out an old settlement of super mutants and then he'll let you have his truck. So you think, after doing that, I would be given the truck, right? Actually, no. If you go back to the guy who promised you the truck, he has no dialogue, even though by the terms of your agreement, nothing else had to be done to be given help leaving. In spite of this, you can't actually take him up on his reward until you solve the entirely unrelated faction struggle quests. So not only do these factions have poor exposition, undefined goals, and very little in the way of character, they don't even technically have anything to offer you for doing their jobs. In the end, the protagonist really didn't need to side with either faction to get home. If the mod had thought all of its premises through, you could have done the job for Godfrey and left right then and there. You can't do this, unfortunately, so it sort of ends up feeling like you have no reason to care about or help either of these groups. In my first playthrough, I did end up siding with the Plague, because however terrible the exposition may be, lots of bad exposition will make me care a tiny bit more than having no exposition whatsoever. You run a rampage through the Underground Railroad base, watch their leader get his head blown off.
Hello, Hardrick. You bastard. You've ruined what little Alton had left. And for what? Nothing. For nothing. You and your people abandoned us when we most needed help. You are all insane. Why would we let people like you out of a vault?
And then finally, you are able to go back to Godfrey, who shows you his truck and has you retrieve a fuel cell controller from the childhood home of the mod author. The creator actually remodeled his own home and has you walk through it before you finish the mod. Really sweet little detail if you're aware of what's going on. If this was any other house, it'd be a weird side distraction, but it's kind of nice. If you go on his computer terminal, you can actually generate the mod's LOD files via the in-game terminal of its author, which is a really weird meta thing that made me smile. Once you get the part, you hop in the truck and hear the voice acting do its thing, and the mod ends. What can I say about Alton, Illinois? Okay. You've obviously gotten the point that I think a lot of this mod was done poorly. Its world feels uncanny, its presentation is sloppy, and its story is a complete mess. I've received and understood the mod as exactly what it is, a passion project by a kid who loved Fallout 3. And on that level, I can appreciate what it was trying to do. The mod feels like a DLC for Fallout 3 made by someone with no experience or understanding of game design whatsoever. And I mean, that's what it is. In regard to Fallout fan projects on YouTube, the content can be divided broadly into two sections. There's gameplay and there's merciless shit-talking. If you enjoy the merciless shit-talking, fair enough, so do I, but this series isn't about that. I could talk about all the things wrong with this mod for another hour if I wanted to, but that's exactly it. I don't want to. That sort of nitpicking, to me, should be reserved for professional works that I paid for. This is a free mod made by a teenager, and honestly, for a free mod made by a teenager, it isn't half bad. The mod author is currently working on a project for Fallout 4, which I'll link in the description so you can follow its progress if you want. I certainly will be. The premise is super interesting, and I really love analyzing authors' second works, as you can always tell the strength of an artist by how they moved from their first project to their second. What they keep, what they toss, what they learn. It's fascinating to me. I'll make a video on it when it comes out, but for now I have, like 20 more mods to talk about, and that's not counting the other projects I'm working on. Make sure to drop a sub so you're there when those videos come out. There are lots of big things on the way. Thanks for watching. Peace.